Welcome to Let's Hear It.
Let's Hear It is a podcast for and about the field of foundation and nonprofit communications, produced by its two co-hosts, Eric Brown and Kirk Brown. No relation.
Well said, Eric. And I'm Kirk.
And I'm Eric.
The podcast is sponsored by the Communications Network and the Lumina Foundation.
We're talking to people about their work and what's happening in the field with the hopes of making this growing arena just a little bit more accessible to us all.
You can find Let's Hear It on any podcast subscription platform. You can find us on Twitter at Let's Hear It Cast, and you can email us at hello@letshearitcast.com.
Let us know if you have any thoughts about what you hear today, including people we should have on the show.
And if you like the show, please rate us on Apple Podcasts so that more people can find us.
So let's get on to the show.
Welcome once again. We're so pleased to have you join us for another edition of Let's Hear It. You've found us. You've made it. You're here. We're so glad to welcome you. And Mr. Brown, as always, I'm so glad to welcome you for another excellent edition and for all of the great work that you've done for us on our behalf this week. How's it going?
If it's going well, if this podcasting stuff doesn't work out, there's a wonderful job for you at the door at Walmart. You are an exquisite greeter.
Hey, this is worthy of being well greeted or whatever, or well received. This is great stuff. And I learned this week that we have another listener to Let's Hear It. And this is one of those ones where if only the person we're about to hear from this week listens to this podcast, we're going to be doing this for the rest of our lives because it's so gratifying to know that she's listened and she enjoys it. So set this up. What do we got ahead for us this week? Because this is awesome.
Valerie Goode, Vice President of Marketing and Communications at the San Francisco Foundation. We do this show for you. And I was so thrilled that you were interested in coming on and talking about your work because it is really great work what you're doing. So that's what we have. We have Valerie Goode, who she's a terrific person. She's really fun. And I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. The work that she's doing at the San Francisco Foundation, which is promoting racial equity and economic inclusion, is some of the most important work that anybody can do anywhere, and she is doing it with grace and style and humor. And I very much enjoyed spending time with her from an undisclosed location that our listeners will learn about shortly.
You got to listen for that. I almost led with that, but I chose not to. So this is Valerie Goode, the Vice President for Marketing and Communications at the San Francisco Foundation, having just gone through the 1 year mark in the role, right?
I think it was April 13th.
Well worth the listen. This is Valerie Goode on Let's Hear It. We'll listen and then we'll come back.
Welcome to Let's Hear It. My guest today I'm so excited. My guest today is Valerie Goode. She is the Vice President for Marketing and Communications at the San Francisco Foundation. And oh my goodness, we're going to have some fun. Valerie, thank you so much for being a guest on Let's Hear It.
Eric, I can't believe it because, I've been your biggest fan and your podcast has been a beacon to me.
A beacon, you say?
It was speaking to me even before I entered into philanthropy, and your guests were calling me.
They called you
in. They were calling me in through their interviews with you. So
all hours of the night they called you.
all hours, because you don't know this, but prior to speaking with you as part of my interview session with the San Francisco Foundation, I was like, I have to listen to every single podcast that he did so that I'm prepared for this interview. So there you have it. Ask me anything about this podcast. I will be able to bring up a little bits and nuggets of it. But it certainly was a good time spent. And I learned quite a bit about your guests and how humorous you are. As part of that exercise.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, Val.
You are very welcome.
I like my guests to introduce me. Okay, for the record, we're speaking on Zoom here, and I am sitting in my mother's closet.
This is true.
This is true. I'm sitting in my mother's closet. Her shoes are right behind me on the wall. I'm visiting her. It's her birthday. Even though I don't think she listens to the podcast, I won't say how old she is, but she's getting there. She is moving north. but she's great, hale and hearty, and I came out for her birthday now that we're both vaccinated and, cool. So, so I don't have my normal fabulous studio in Bernal Heights. Instead, I am sitting in her closet. So,
leave it to this episode where you're going to have a conversation with me and you're going to be sitting. I don't even know what you're sitting on because it seems like you're very low in this closet.
I'm lower than usual.
You're kind of like really low in the closet, and it is a very interesting visual. So,
yeah. And don't be distracted by the Jimmy Choos on the wall behind you.
Beautiful. Work of art. Love it.
All right. So, Valerie Goode, there's much to talk about. But first, I have more things that I need to know about you that I don't know. I know you're from the East Coast. I know, and I learned a few things as I was trolling the interwebs. But where'd you grow up? What'd you do? How have we gotten so lucky? What were all the wonderful things that happened to you along the way that led you to this fabulous place at San Francisco Foundation?
Well, I don't think we have enough time to just go into all of those, but I will let you know that I hail from the state of Maine, and that I was born and raised in what we call South Central Maine, in a town called Lewiston, made famous by Muhammad Ali having a fight there. Also, Bates College resides there. So I am one of very few people of color that grew up in the area that I grew up, and appreciate all of the beauty that comes out of Maine, but have had a personal conflicts with the experiences that I've had being who I am and how I look in places where people are, all different than I am. So I appreciate that experience because it's, I think, made me very resilient. And I think it's led me to the work that I'm doing today. And so I have a deep love of the Northeast and all its complexities, including my birth state. But as you can see, I did not stay there. And I think, would I ever return? That's a question I think I'll keep on asking myself. But at this point, I'm enjoying what I'm learning on the West Coast, and have found this to be a perfect place for me, especially during the time we find ourselves, where I've got to terming it, I guess, the racial reckoning that is happening, across the nation, and feel really, really good about being here while I am really reflecting on a lot of that formative experience and really kind of making meaning of it through my work and making meaning of it personally.
You started as a reporter, didn't you, after college?
Oh, yes, I did. I surely did. Yes. So I went to Northeastern University on the East Coast. That's in Boston. And it is a co-op school. So I don't know if you know what that means, but that essentially is for people like myself who prefer to have experience in their major and really need that break from the academia of it all. And I found myself with an opportunity to work at the Boston Globe while I was a student, and went on to journalism through that experience. And so it is true. I used to be a journalist. I covered crime. I worked at the Syracuse newspapers in upstate New York. And through that experience, which I would term traumatic, just because when you cover crime, it is, crisis after crisis, and really having to find a spiritual grounding to be able to interview people who've lost their loved one. It just required a tremendous amount of emotional stability that I found not sustainable. So I gave up my journalism career and moved into health communications, actually, from there. Yeah. But yes, journalism, it does, that is how I was groomed as a, undergrad. And it is the roots that I kind of return to when I think about my professional development.
I love journalists in our field, well, half of them do great. The other half don't, but half of them do great because they are right on deadline. They can get to the point. They can figure things out quickly, and they can become generalists where they can learn really fast about stuff. And
yeah, they're gamers.
They're gamers, exactly.
I love a journalist because you know how to thrive, right? Like get in there, you got to get the job done. We're a little rude. Really smart.
Smoke cigars, you know.
In all the good ways.
Keep a bottle of hooch in the desk.
Exactly. You got to maintain. Yeah, no judgment here. No shame in it.
It's glory. And did I read that you worked for the governor of Massachusetts and you were in charge of background checks?
Oh my God. Absolutely true story. Yeah, I don't know how they thought I was even mature enough to handle that job. But yeah, my gig was I would go to the FBI, I would go to the state police, IRS, and basically investigate anyone who was going to take up a board of commission for the Massachusetts state governor. And then I would go to the governor and I would say, no, or yes. Based on my research. It was very interesting, and I learned a lot.
I bet you did. You must.
I have a lot of information that
take some secrets to the grave, are we?
Yes. Yeah. There. You know, I followed the code. I do not speak of that, but there are a lot of people who that would make you go, as it relates to their taxes and their criminal records. So I guess that tells you that, you know, a little bump in your police record may not stop you from doing much.
You haven't done a background check on me, have you?
No, I gave that up.
Okay.
Yeah, it was fun for a little while, but it's not strategic work that I love to do. And so while it was good for a time, it did not last that long.
And then you then you did comms in the governor's office, right?
I didn't. I did. Well, here's the story. Jane Swift was the governor when I worked as the director of background checks. Mitt Romney came in to replace her. And his transition team came in, and, you know, this is from my own perspective, so I don't know if this is like the official record, but there were folks who were looking at us, folks of color, whether they should stay or they should go. And based on my interactions, I decided I needed to go. So from there, I found a job with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and began my stint, I guess, in health communications, where I started as a health communication specialist under the Diabetes Prevention and Control Program.
And then you went to Gallup, which yes. I love research. I love survey research. I love probability and statistics. It was the one math class I got an A in. And I love all that stuff. And I think that it's so cool that you have this great background as, you know, doing journalism and then working in health communications and then kind of getting a sense of how do you put your finger on the pulse of something? How are you pulling all of that together even today? How are you pulling? And one of the things is, for folks who are listening, people come into this job from a million paths and no two paths are the same. Mine is also, you know, weird, but yours isn't weird. It's just smart and good.
Oh, it's weird.
But everybody brings stuff together in different ways. How have you taken all of these components of your career and pulled them to this moment where you're doing, and I'm not just saying this, amazing work. So,
well, thank you.
Yeah,
let's start with the amazing part. No,
but you are.
Eric, that's
we'll
great
talk about
question.
that in the second half. We'll talk about your amazing work in the second half. But
okay, good. All right. I want to make sure it gets out there.
Yes,
good.
Don't worry. And then we'll put out a press release. But yeah, tell me about synthesizing.
Yeah, no, you know, I think that is a really great question, Eric, because I find myself intentionally asking the question, how am I, you know, evolving from what I have done previously? Where are the places where I forgot something that I've already learned? And I find that when I think back to my experiences at Gallup, that's always happening. I'm always like, oh my goodness, I did that at Gallup. why didn't I think about that when I embarked on it, for the third time, this time? But I feel like it is a culmination, right? So the work ethic that I may have learned as a journalist, the grit, thinking about, is this really the story? What is the real question? Those things have stuck with me. It doesn't matter whether it was through background checks. What's the right question here? I mean, those kind of foundational teachings that I got as a journalist, they're continually there. And then these experiences that I've had as a director of background checks, forming relationships with people. Is this state police officer going to give me the information that I need to hear right now? And in my role right now, am I having the right conversation with someone? Am I setting the right environment to allow them to feel safe to say the things that they need to say to me, which I learned as a journalist, right? Mm-hmm. So as a journalist, you are taught how to create safety, get people to trust you. And, the great ones can do it in a moment, right? Some of us, it takes 3 or 4 emails and then maybe 3 meetings, and then it's the story. But you get what I'm saying. It's like a lot of those things have carried forth. And even things like, I would say the biggest thing that Gallup has taught me is part of, beyond their poll work, they do a lot around employee engagement. And they taught me a lot around the fact that as a manager, so as I've grown in my career, I've had more and more people who report up to me, who are looking for my leadership. At Gallup, it was very clear they had a very strong point of view around people work for people. People have different strengths. How can you get them to amplify those strengths and feel really connected to the work in the way that they interact with it? And so there are different kind of nuggets of information that I find myself always defaulting to. And then there are places where I have to challenge myself to think back. Oh my goodness, I did a focus group series at Gallup, and why didn't I think about this thing that I was taught? So there are many, many things that kind of come to mind, and I do try to evolve my experiences so that I get smarter, that I'm learning more, but I also want to remember what I've already learned, right? That there are things there that are in default due to the experiences that I've had previously. So I love that question. And I feel like it's a question we all should be asking ourselves, because it's really easy to forget some of the things that you've done. Like I literally had that thought, I think even last week, where someone was asking me to do something and I was thinking of it as I'd never done it before. And I was, what am I talking about? Of course I've done this. Let's go back and call on those experiences. And so because I think it's really important. I feel like people, myself, need to feel like things are demystified, right? Like it is really overwhelming to always feel like this is a pioneering effort. And so when I think about where I've actually been, it helps me to take on bigger projects and to feel grounded when I'm doing them.
Well, philanthropy is like nothing else in the world. It's the push me, pull you, or the weird animal that doesn't exist in nature except in its own special world. And after the break, I want to talk about how you've taken all those things and applied them to your work at the San Francisco Foundation, working for not only just a foundation, but a community foundation, which is a totally different animal than other entities. And then I want to talk about the work you're doing right now and how you are helping to bring the community together in a really, really challenging time. So after this break, we'll be back with Valerie Goode, the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at the San Francisco Foundation.
You're listening to Let's Hear It, a podcast about foundation and nonprofit communications hosted by Kirk Brown and Eric Brown. Let's Hear It is sponsored by the Communications Network, which connects, gathers, and informs the field of leaders working in communications for good. Because foundations and nonprofits that communicate well are stronger, smarter, and vastly more effective. You can find Let's Hear It online at letshearitcast.com or on Twitter at Let's Hear It Cast. Thanks for listening, and now back to the show.
Welcome back to Let's Hear It. My guest is Valerie Goode, the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at the San Francisco Foundation. And as I said before the break, you're doing amazing work, and you have been now in the job for a year. Congratulations. I think you just hit your anniversary last month, or this month. And,
this month.
I'm sure this was exactly what you expected when you showed up for, oh, wait a minute, you never got to show up for work at the San Francisco Foundation. What has this year been like for you?
It has been a year of exploration and learning and operating in ambiguity. That's what this year has been, because you're absolutely right. I have stepped foot once into the San Francisco Foundation offices. I have challenged folks who actually still go into the office for business to show me around with their laptop. So I've asked actually Catherine Key to walk through. I said, "Oh, that's where people eat." Okay, that kind of thing. And it's been an interesting exercise in just letting go, because I don't have any there really when it comes to some of the things that you would have to learn in a new job, like how much time does it take to get to work, and what is the culture like, and is it serious? Are they quiet there? I have no idea. So that will, I guess, keep me in perpetual new employee status until we all embark into some new normal that would be in person and having proximity to other people while we do our work. So it's been a very interesting transition, and I actually feel fortunate, because it has allowed me to organize my day in a way that is really natural to me, and I don't have to care about how the day carries itself when other people make their needs known. I have just like everyone else, tried to battle the Zoom fatigue and things like that, but I count myself very fortunate that I've been able to be employed, to have a safe space to learn a new field. And I am still at the very, I still feel like there's just so much for me to learn, because what I understand is that there's so much around relationships. And I find it very challenging to develop those kinds of relationships that I think are key to actually moving work forward, especially when you're talking about a community foundation and having that connection to the community, the people. And I felt really stifled in ways that I would reach out and make my presence known and learn. And so in those ways, I do feel like I'm really excited to try to get back to some semblance of what I remember. But I do feel very fortunate in to just be part of the San Francisco Foundation, and to have had a mentor like you, who's kind of opened up some of the world to me. Because if anyone on this listening to this podcast right now doesn't know, Eric knows everyone in philanthropy. Eric's like, yeah, no, let me just call them up. I'm like, so I so appreciate the fact that you are who you are, and that you've really helped me to have a deeper understanding of the work, through projects like our annual report, but also to understand that people and relationships are really a big part of how things and kind of power moves through this industry. So that's what it's been like so far. And I look forward. I don't know if I told you this, but I am going to be part of Career Pathways. National Council on Foundations has a Career Pathways program. I am super psyched to be part of it.
Very cool.
Because I'm going to learn more about philanthropy, and I will understand more of the nuances between community foundations, private foundations, and all the other foundations that are part of that ecosystem. And I couldn't be, more excited about that, and to meet people. So I'll have to tell you more about that. That's maybe cool. Another podcast.
Also, this year has been kind of busy. Things have happened in the last year. And I mean, who knew of course, that COVID would last as long as it would, that we would, as you said before, before the break, be experiencing a reckoning on race, and race plus, I think. I don't know what that actually means, but it's race, but it's also more than that. And that as a community foundation, being in the center of so many of those conversations, obviously, Fred Blackwell's voice has been phenomenally important, and I know that you and he have worked really closely in the last year, and helping to just kind of keep everybody from, I don't know, spinning out. And having to hold that feels like it must be a real challenge. And, you're a Black woman responding to anti-Black racism and dealing with everything that we are dealing with. How have you managed to, I don't know, do you compartmentalize? How do you do this? That's a very long-winded question. Saying, how do you do what you do, given who you are and given what you do?
I gotta say that the answer that would be the most authentic is I don't know. I don't know. I can tell you that this year has been heavy in ways that I cannot articulate. It has forced myself, Fred, all of the people of color that are part of our organization to do really deep personal work, where I think in my previous versions of myself have been expert at compartmentalizing, have had to really reckon with these things at work, have had to address things and talk about the systems of oppression that have been there the whole time that I've ignored so that I could do what I need to do every day. It has been a tremendous burden in terms of my emotional stamina. I've worked with Fred on several blogs where sometimes we're just like, we can't do this. Like it's just a tremendous amount of sadness, and just to accept reality sometimes is really, really, really challenging. To watch a man be murdered, hear about a woman sleeping and she's murdered. I mean, there's just so many examples, and they feel relentless, Eric. They feel relentless. It is over and over that we're having to relive some of this, and it's like a cut being scratched open every time. But through that, I feel like the Community Foundation really feels rooted in our mission around advancing racial equity and economic inclusion. And with that, I think we have felt a tremendous amount of responsibility to be in community, to be out there, to have our point of view be noticed. And for some folks who know about the San Francisco Foundation, we've had our North Star, racial equity, economic inclusion, since 2016. And so we've been talking about this previously in an environment where some folks didn't really want to address it. It was, I think it was harder to get noticed in the previous environment. Now, racial equity is at the forefront. It is the new thing where everybody is talking about racial equity, and they're looking to organizations like mine to, either get a sense of what are some of the things that we can do. They are looking to us as a thought leader. And I think that only adds an extra element of complexity as we talk about really personal events that we are seeing on a day-to-day basis, it feels like. And so, I don't know how we do it, Eric. I really don't know where it is. And I think, if I hold myself to the fire around what it is, I think it's a real deep commitment to our North Star that allows us to fight for the voice and to fight for being part of the conversation that we feel like is changing the world. There's all these debates. Is this a revolution? Is this not a revolution? I, for one, am hoping this is a revolution. And if it's a revolution, then what's my role in the revolution? And how can I show up every day? And I might have bad days where I can't talk today. But, if you look at the body of what I have been able to contribute, I have to ask myself, what are you doing today? How can you be of service today? And I think that, I guess is the long answer to your question, because, I feel like we are in a historic time, and I become a little bit overwhelmed by the fact that we are in this really important time in history. And there's just so much pressure that comes with trying to make sure that we are forwarding the work in a way that is productive. But I also feel like so energized by the fact that we are having this important conversation. And I know that we're going to make mistakes, and I'm all about making mistakes. I will be like, oops, we need to change it. Just because I feel like I can't be stifled by perfection. We have to try. So in my mind, that's the spirit I kind of bring with me. Sometimes I am even pulling some words out of Fred, like, no, I need you to tell me something about your personal life, like I'm pulling it out of him. And he's like, is this really necessary? And I think, yes, I think that in some ways we have to be uncomfortable to forward the work. And so that's the spirit with which we are moving forward with San Francisco Foundation. And there's plenty for us to learn, and we're talking about really important things like how are we centering the work? How are we helping people within the organization to understand we've all been groomed in systems of oppression? There are plenty of times where I'm like, oh my goodness, I just had an aha moment that I have been thinking that this is true, but this is not true. This is some other narrative that I have allowed to kind of metabolize in my body. And I need to now rid myself of that thinking. And it's challenging because I love a routine and I love a best plan, like a blueprint. And I like all of these things, but I have to remember to go back to ask myself, okay, why, is this the right thing? And sometimes I get it right. And sometimes I don't. But you got to kind of get back on the horse and keep plodding forward. So,
well, I totally agree. We have been gaslighted into this is how things are done. This is what the state of the world is. This is reality for, 400 years. And I do think that we're getting somewhere. I mean, but as you say, and you make a really great point, is that you actually have to stay in it. I'm sure there are days, I don't want to write about Dante Wright today. Yeah. I don't have to think about it, but there is this responsibility that you have clearly demonstrated that you take seriously. And
Eric, honestly, I think that everybody in communications has this privilege that we are shapers of the narrative. And if we are not actually realizing that is within our power, then that's a real loss. Yeah. Because one of the reasons I am so passionate about communication is because it is what helps people. It helps people to know where resources are. It helps people to understand how to see things or how not to see things. And it is an awesome privilege to be able to create narrative that helps people to make meaning of whatever it is going on in their lives, no matter what aspect of communications you are a part of. But there is a tremendous power and privilege that go along with writing or recording or, whatever communication modality you are a part of. And I take that very seriously. And sometimes I get it right. And sometimes let's do that again. Let's take that down from the website.
Well, I have to tell you, at the risk of sounding like an obsequious, fawning fanboy, I have been really impressed with how you've taken on this job. You do it with humor and grace and humility, and you did not come in with, large daggers that you shoved into people. Like, you didn't change all the bedtimes. It's really been great to see you flourish in this role. It is not an easy job.
You're gonna make me cry, Eric. I think stop.
It has the added benefit of truth. No crying. There's no crying on Let's Hear It, only laughing. But no, it's true. I've learned so much from you about how to lead, and I've just really been impressed. And it's a privilege to be, in your circle, to be one of the people that I say, you should talk to Valerie. But it's great. And congratulations. Where do you see this? So now we're in a certain place in our, all these things have happened. We have the Biden administration, we have vaccinations. We are now having a different kind of conversation on race and equity and economic inclusion. Where are we going in the short term? Who knows where we're going to go in the long term, but where are we going today and tomorrow and the week after that?
Well, here's a very specific answer to your question. I think that is grander than the response I'm going to give you. But the thing I'm grappling with right now is this idea of how to effectively communicate transformative solidarity, and we can talk about whatever that means, through centering Black and Indigenous community. So at the San Francisco Foundation, we're really talking about creating a principle of centering Black and Indigenous people in our work. That then has a conversation about, well, what about BIPOC? What about the other people of color? And what do I say? And then our principle around transformative solidarity, which is basically that we all stand together, that no matter what group you help, it actually helps to lift us all. And we want to be part of that unified growth, right? And so for me, I think it's really around taking very deep rooted ways in which we have been conditioned to think about race, conditioned to think about different cultures and people, and helping to communicate why centering Black and Indigenous people is an important piece to it, because it actually helps to lift up the histories that have been really pushed aside, right? You can think what you think if you don't understand the root of global anti-Blackness or global anti-indigeneity. So for me, it's these really meaty topics and helping to make them not just palatable, but to metabolize through the bodies of people so that we can get to a different level. Because the truth is that we can't just talk about like Black Lives Matter and not address some of the root causes as to why we would even need a movement around Black lives, right? So that's, to me, the next step is to really, so now we've uncovered things. We've had this reckoning, the dust is all out there. How is it that we can then take those particles and help to create a new future where it is more just and we have more realistic ways of expression? I get exhausted by just thinking about how can we do that, but I feel really excited by different ways that I'm seeing people communicate through podcasts and through social media and art. And there's just been a real attention to healing. And I feel like I'd like to be able to kind of weave in some of that healing into the narrative. And and so so I'm just going to begin where you begin, like eating a whale. You take one bite at a time and try to get as many.
Have to eat whale.
I eat whale. It's hypothetical whale. Yeah, it's not the
vegan whale.
Right. Yes. yeah, that it feels really ambitious, and we're not the only organization kind of doing that. I feel like there's so many organizations who are out there on the front lines, really trying to make meaning of what's happening, to support people who need that support. And I feel like we just move forward. We keep moving the North Star forward. And I think obviously narrative shift and ensuring that people have the information they need to make informed decisions is a huge part of that. And I take that, very seriously. And so, I do look forward to getting innovative, to trying to figure out in what ways can we provide, collateral materials and things like that, that are meeting the moment, So to me, that's calling all the smart people and seeing what they think. and then saying, oh yeah, great idea. And then using that idea.
Well, I really appreciate the way you have framed that opportunity, I would call it. It makes a ton of sense, and it really resonates with me. And I also just appreciate your time. It's so much fun to have an excuse to talk to you and to kind of sort of hang out. And then next time we'll do it in a bar.
You know what? I was going to tell you, I said, remember this story because I know that you had done a podcast with someone in a bar, and I'm like, and I get the closet. Yeah, do over.
You will get a part 2, and it will be in a bar, and the drinks will be on me. Valerie Goode, Vice President of Marketing and Communications at the San Francisco Foundation. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
And we're back. Oh man, this is like multiple PhD dissertations. This is so many things happening at once. And this is, I have to say, I don't want to delve into the hiring process for the San Francisco Foundation. You are clearly part of that. So that's a strategy for a really good and generous guest, is invite people that you've helped be through their hiring processes. I can only imagine the kind of depth and breadth of just all the amazing folks that come forward for these roles. My question for you is, when Valerie came into the room, did you simply ask, when can you start? Because that's the only question. That's the only question that I would have had, having heard her share her story.
She was great. She brought this amazing breadth of experience, but as you can hear, just a joy and a light and an enthusiasm for this work. And she was such a great choice. I didn't pick her, so I will not take the credit. Wish I could.
Yeah.
This was Fred Blackwell's decision, but she has proved to be a really, really terrific leader for that department and at that foundation, which is, a place that I care deeply about. And it was a great conversation. I think she's great. And this, like I said, this work is so important that and it's hard to do, and it is challenging. I mean, it is personally challenging. And so that was a lot of what I hope that conversation brought out, but also kind of demonstrating that you can do it.
Well, let's go straight there, because this was the famous 20-minute mark of the podcast, of the interview. It's literally
always skip 20 minutes.
Well, there's a lot of good stuff right up front. Can I actually say, walking back to the beginning, I have one issue, which also tells me that Valerie, just one.
Finally, Kirk, stand up for yourself. Tell me your issue.
So the many reasons that Valerie is exactly who you want in this role, because she's interested in telling other people's stories more than telling her own, which just came out loud and clear in the conversation. She has yet to post a bio on the San Francisco Foundation website. It's coming soon. So soon is relative. Soon could be anytime. So I was actually so glad. I was giving you props because I had seen that before I started listening. And so you walk us through her story of coming to this work. And once again, we see this journey people take, starting, being a woman of color, a person of color, growing up in Maine. So another one of those stories about, from early on, I was dealing with differences. And, she started right away talking about this great reckoning, that's going on right now about, race and inclusion and equity. But in our country, But, what a story. I mean, she's a reporter, Northeastern University, co-op school trained, doing background checks with the governor's office, a field tested journalist, and then a public health communicator. So, and then Gallup.
Oh, and by the way, Gallup, sorry. And she neglected to mention that she ran communications for Oakland Unified School District. Oh. Now there's an easy job.
Wow.
Yes. So she's been tested.
So I loved how you actually asked her, given all of that range of experiences, how is that coming to you in your work? How are you bringing that with you? And I mean, I can take you through it, but I'm just curious, how did her response to that land for you? Because I thought it was really, again, we keep using the phrase master's class, but I feel like it was a master's class for somebody who's making their way in this field, of how all these different experiences that we're having, as unlikely as they might seem, they all add up to the whole being greater than the sum of the parts, if we can draw on them, and frankly, as she was talking about, if we could even remember what we've learned, right? Because there's so many things we learn that we forget along the way. But how did that land for you? I just love that whole reflection and self-reflection that she gave us through that part of your discussion.
Well, it's a reminder, of course, that the work that we do as storytellers and strategists draws upon as broad an array of experiences and talents and all that other stuff as any job I can think of almost, and that there is no straight line to this job. And she has worked in survey research, and she's worked in politics, and she did background checks. So she kind of understands the sensitivity of public life, all of those things. There is no one recipe for success in this field. And what I would say to folks out there who are interested in social change, I would tell them that social change communication is a great way in, because I honestly believe that it is a meritocracy, or it is a version of a meritocracy, in that folks who can distill or explain or communicate the vast kinds of experiences that we have as people do great.
Yeah.
And they move quickly in the field, and they achieve great things. And she's a perfect example of that, because there is no straight way into this job. And the other thing that I would say is, if you're a foundation president out there, or a senior whatever, and you're hiring a communications person, remember that and take that into account, that the full array of experience can be amazingly valuable to your team. So that's just a little HR plug out there. But her story is a great one. It's exemplary, but by no means normal.
Well, and she changed your life forever, because when she said that your podcast has been a beacon to me, and your guests have been calling to me through your interviews, I'm like, we're never ever going to stop doing this podcast now. We're doing this for the rest of time. That was just...
but now I got to send her a check.
Well, once again, she says it better than we could, right? But this, I agree. These guests have been a beacon for me too. I do have to do this little bit of
every guest who says I'm a beacon, I got to send them a check for $10.
There you go. Well, I think we really need to explore, are you sitting in your mother's closet, and are you still sitting in your mother's closet? And actually, haven't you always been sitting in your mother's closet while we've been doing this podcast?
Please. I've spent enough money on therapy to know that is not a fair question. That is a set-up question.
The setting. Oh, go ahead.
No, I managed to extricate myself from my mother's closet and returned to the Bay Area, but I was there long enough to wish her a happy birthday and get the great big birthday post-COVID. We both got vaxxed hug.
Congratulations.
And then I, of course, did household services. Like I put together a table and a little bit of gardening and a lot of cooking.
Hey, get your vaccines so you can hug the people you love. There you go. There's your motto.
But that was great. My mom's, don't tell anybody, 87.
Oh, that's just congratulations. That's
lives
awesome.
Alone, still works.
So it must have been the setting, because you threw some elbows. It came in very subtly.
Elbows?
You said you love journalists in our field. Half of them do great work.
Okay. No. So I never got a chance to finish my thought.
Yeah.
which is half of them come in and they want to get both sides of the story because they are journalists through and through. And what I don't care about the other side of the story. Right. I want to advocate for my side of the story.
Right.
And if you really want to get both sides of the story, you shouldn't have left journalism, because it's not that in many of the areas that we're working in, the other side of the story, forgive me, is wrong.
Yeah.
If you're talking about there's two sides to whether climate change is a problem and whether it's caused by, no. There's not two sides to that. There's two sides on how you solve the problem. But if you don't stipulate to the problem, then how are we? What kind of conversation are we having? Or there's two sides to that there was good people on both sides of the race race protests. Like no. You stop saying that. That is not true.
Yeah.
So in that sense, if you are going to come at a advocacy position from a place where you used to have to get both sides, whatever that means, and I think journalism sometimes bends over backwards to find some alternative point of view, whether or not there's a good reason to do so, then this isn't the job for you. And so half of the journalists come in and they get frustrated because they want to it's a different job than they expected.
Yeah.
I love journalists. They're great. They're smart. They write fast. They all that stuff. So it's that was the point I didn't get a chance to make, but thank you for pointing that out, Kirk, because you're right. It needed some explanation.
No, I'm glad you got a chance to clarify. And I will say the times I've seen that play out, it does give me, even though it can be frustrating because it can, as you mentioned, be in conflict with kind of our work as persuasion oriented advocates, that concept of journalism as a true profession. This is my profession, the ability to see the full story and hold it completely. And I have to write to that level. It's really interesting to see people kind of struggle with that sometimes, when they come to this advocacy work. So I'm glad you got a chance to clarify. I knew there was a fuller story there. So
I wasn't just being a schmo. It's interesting because a news story, they call it a story, right? It's a story because we're trying to tell a story and people respond to stories, and storytelling is the thing, and story.
Yeah.
And I agree. And that's why journalists great journalists can be amazingly good advocates and they can be great foundation communications people as long as they don't mind watching the other people play, because we just write about the people who do stuff.
Yeah.
So and that's the flip side of it, is that some journalists, they throw off their cloak of objectivity and they want to be an advocate. And if they go to work for a foundation, they find out that we're just giving the money to the people who do all that stuff a lot of the time. And that can be frustrating.
So we have to bring Valerie's story to the San Francisco Foundation, where she's been the past year. And I think there's two big chunks of this based on the conversation you had. And the first that I can't resist kind of just asking about was her reflection on starting work there. You start during a pandemic. It sounds like she in a year has been in the office maybe once, if I heard that correctly.
No, but just in the interview time. Since she's gotten the job, she hasn't
been there in one time.
I've told her about her. She has a very nice office.
That's right.
She ever gets to sit in it.
So there's a couple things. One, what was it like to go through a hiring process through a pandemic, let alone, getting someone oriented to the role? But also she mentions, I've learned how to operate in ambiguity. And it was so interesting to hear her say that, because I've heard you say that before about working in philanthropy, that, you really learned this part about just being in ambiguity and operating in ambiguity. And can you talk a little bit about that? Just like what that experience is like, how people navigate their way through it. And then how did you do any of this given the pandemic? Because if she started in April, you must have been trying to go through this process when things were first being shut down, I would imagine. But yeah,
we we closed the office for 2 weeks from March something to April, on March 15th to April 1st or something like that. We were like, at least 2 weeks. And then, of course, it was longer than that. And we are all just figuring out how to live our lives and under what rules. And when you're starting a new job and starting a job that has this kind of social effect, that's really hard. And I think the only thing you can do, and I'm sure anybody listening who's also probably working remotely, probably doesn't know what's going to happen next week or the next month or the month after that, whether we have reached our crescendo and are on our way back to normal life, whether we're about ready to have another spike, who knows? that the best that we can do is to be responsive, to listen carefully, to keep our eyes open, to be willing to change, flexible, all that stuff. And Valerie's done that in spades, which is why she's so effective. Yeah. And I think that we have all seen people who are good at that, and they are able to get things done and make a difference. And for folks who have a challenge with that, they have to find ways within their own sense of wanting to be regimented. And there's folks like that who are not me and really effective and great people that I'm sure this is a very, very challenging time. But it is a hard, I always say that being the head of communications at a community foundation is like it's the toughest job you'll ever love. It's like the Marines. And it's not easy. There are a million things happening. And when you are working on racial equity and economic inclusion right now, in this context, at this moment, it is extremely challenging. And when you don't have the opportunity to sit with people and to really listen and to be in the same room and to take the temperature of how people feel and what they're doing, and this includes grantees, it includes other funders, and it certainly includes your colleagues at the foundation, it's 5 times more difficult. It's a hard job on the best day, and on the worst day, it seems sometimes damn near impossible.
Well, include people into the scale, because not everybody who listens to us may know, but include people into the scale of the San Francisco Foundation's touch on this, because in terms of the size of their enterprise, the level at which they operate in terms of being a grant maker on their own, what scale are we talking about? How big is the San Francisco Foundation relative to the whole community foundation landscape in the United States?
It's certainly one of the top 10 community foundations by endowment. And it has a reasonably good sized endowment, which is to say that they have money to make grants on their own outside of the donor advised funds and other types of funds that community foundations hold. One of the other things that the San Francisco Foundation is doing is partnering with donors who care about racial equity and this type of work to make grants in partnership, so the money of each goes twice as far. That part is also pretty new and unusual for community foundations, many of which serve as a repository for philanthropic opportunities. So a donor will start a fund, and then they will allocate the money through their fund out into the community at the donor's own behest. And that has a value, of course. But what some community foundations are starting to do is to identify their own strategies and partner with donors, bringing them in the door for this very reason, because they have expertise. They have program staff who really understand about how to support the community. So if someone comes in and says, I really care about homelessness, for example, can you help me think through a strategy for addressing some part of the challenge? And then you have professionals who will sit down and help you think that through as a donor. So that's what the San Francisco Foundation is doing. And they also have a voice. So they have their own kind of community presence, and their CEO Fred Blackwell, who has become quite a powerful voice in the San Francisco Bay Area for advancing equity, they use that voice as well. So it's an advocacy organization, it's a fundraising organization, and a grant making organization. So the opportunities there, I find, are really, really powerful and very exciting. I think community foundation work is some of the most interesting and potentially beneficial work that you can do in the philanthropy world. Understanding that there are not that many community foundations with the kind of money that, say, a Gates Foundation or a Ford Foundation or Hewlett or some of those others can distribute. But if you're thinking about putting money into your community, a specific, geographic area that really well, that's a great opportunity. And these big foundations are starting to fund community foundations to do just that, because they have that kind of expertise. And that's, I think, a great development in philanthropy, that a large international foundation will realize that the expertise in solving local or addressing local challenges and opportunities lies in these institutions.
It's so exciting. And, you think of the scale of both the opportunity, but also the challenge in front of the San Francisco Foundation. It makes perfect sense why you would need somebody with the gifts of somebody like a Valerie to bridge all those different roles, because there's so many different parts. And as you were talking with her, it really made me want to ask you about this part, right? How, as a community foundation, do you develop your own point of view and then get to act on it? So before we conclude, we really have to, this reflection that Valerie gave us here about at the 20-minute mark in the interview, just what this process has been like for her for this past year. And I so appreciate it. Full disclosure, I listened to that section twice. I will listen to it again. I encourage anybody to listen to it multiple times because it's such a personal reflection. Here's a leader in one of the seminal institutions doing this seminal work. They've had racial equity and economic inclusion as their North Star since 2016. Valerie stepping up to the opportunity in this moment of racial reckoning that she's describing. And she starts with sharing how heavy this has been for her and the grief. And, she and Fred working on blog posts and just needing to take a break from time to time. And I have to say, getting that glimpse into the personal journey of somebody who, yes, is going to be a leader. And she talks about all the tactical work she's thinking about, the different ways, the collateral, the different ways to bring this story forward. But just that personal journey, isn't that, there's just such a, what is it? Thank you or appreciate you or, thank you. I don't know. It's just, what do you say about that personal quality that she's having to bring to this work as she's going through it, because it's so heavy. It's so sad. And even the personal sense of reflection she's doing around the choices she's made in her life. It was just, I have to tell you, I that section is worth listening and digesting and just reflecting on. I feel like I thought it was a really, really cool part of your whole conversation.
Well, this has been a really hard year, and especially for people of color and especially for people of color working in this work, who you have to do the day job and process the emotions and the experience. And I'm not a person of color. I can't know what that feels like. But all I can say is that I deeply admire Valerie and the many colleagues that I have worked with over the last couple of years, or last year in particular, who I know have had to deal with that, and it's not easy, and I feel kind of almost powerless to offer any support other than to be a friend and a colleague and to try and just be there. And that's about all I can say. But I to admire the people who are just, I just really, really cherish. Valerie's one of them.
Well, look, she's stepping up to be the shaper of the narrative. She talked about that. And I know exactly where this goes. This is a classic no good deed goes unpunished moment, because I like the current team. That's awesome. But it's in her future, White House press secretary. Can you see Valerie Goode just sitting at the front of the room, answering the questions, directing the conversation, this notion of shaping the narrative? This is where we need the experience, the voice, the stature, the tenure. So I'm putting it in the calendar. I'll be checking back. Right. I'll be checking back. So the last thing before we go, transformative solidarity. Transformative solidarity. That was such an interesting part of the conversation that you got to at the end. Creating this principle of centering Black and Indigenous people in the work at the San Francisco Foundation, and then thinking through what that means. Man, I can't wait to learn more about that, because even that process of pairing those words, transformative solidarity, whatever group you help, it helps lift us all. It really, it's funny. It made me think about the benefits of clean air. We talk about it all the time. Clean air helps everybody. And it's like, there's just this thing about cleaning the air and understanding the historical part of this and just all the roots of this systemic and persistent racism and what it's meant. I don't know. It just feels like there's some really, really powerful work ahead from the San Francisco Foundation that's really exciting to hear about.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was a great way of helping me think through how you shape a narrative and how you build upon it and how it benefits our society. We will all just be better. And we are, I think we are better as we continue to have these conversations. They have to be had, and we have to work, and we have to work as hard as we possibly can. And Again, I'm glad you're out there, Valerie, doing this stuff.
That's right.
It's amazing.
That's right. Well, we get it. It's an enormous responsibility. It's not just professional, it's personal. You're exhausted, but we're excited. We want you to show up, keep doing the work. It is so great to see you in here. And Eric, just what a treat. It was really, really great to hear from Valerie.
Well, that was fun.
Well, thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. And that was Let's Hear It.
And that's it for this episode. Please let us know if you have any thoughts about what you heard today or people we should have on the show. And that includes yourself. We'd like to thank
Maggie Brown, our intrepid production coordinator.
John Ali, the tuneful and inspiring composer of our theme music.
We'd also like to thank our sponsors, the Communications Network, the Lumina Foundation, and the Heinz Endowments.
Thank you. And check out the Heinz Endowment, their terrific podcast, We Can Be. That's hosted by Grant Oliphant, and you can find it at heinz.org/podcast.
We would certainly like to thank today's guest, and of course all of you, and thank you, Mr. Brown.
No, thank you, Mr. Brown.
Till next time.
Let's hear it.